It started innocently enough. A twitch of an eye, a slight shift in the lighting, or the subtle rearrangement of furniture. I could never pinpoint the exact moment of change, but my room felt different each time I blinked. Initially, I attributed it to exhaustion. My work had been particularly grueling that week, and the late nights were taking their toll. Sleep deprivation, I thought, or perhaps the onset of a headache. But as I settled into bed that evening, the oscillations between realities became unmistakably pronounced. There was a mirror on the opposite wall, framed in ornate bronze. Every time I blinked, the reflection shifted. First, the bedspread turned from white to a foreboding shade of crimson. Then, the mirror's frame morphed from ornate bronze to a cold, sleek silver. My reflection, once clear and familiar, seemed older, more gaunt with each shift. A sense of dread crept over me. The boundaries of reality were dissolving, and I was caught in its tumultuous wake. What troubled me most wasn't the changing room or the morphing mirror, it was the figure in the corner. Each time my eyes shuttered, the shadowy silhouette drew closer. It never moved when I kept my gaze on it, only advancing in the blind fractions of seconds when darkness consumed my vision. Tension gripped me, my breaths growing shallow. Every blink was an internal battle. I could feel the weight of my eyelids, the dryness of my eyes. It was a catch-22, blinking to relieve the discomfort, but dreading the changes that came with it. In one particularly unsettling shift, my room appeared covered in old, yellowed newspaper clippings. Each article was about disappearances, unsolved mysteries, and unexplainable phenomena. The figure stood closer now, almost within arm's reach. There was something oddly familiar about it, but its form remained elusive, perpetually obscured in shadow. Desperation gnawed at me. I needed to find a way out of this nightmare. I thought about waking up my roommate or calling out for help, but I was paralyzed, ensnared by the uncanny power of the figure and the ever-shifting room. Minutes felt like hours. At some point, I decided that if I could force myself to keep my eyes open long enough, perhaps I could stabilize my reality. But the strain was unbearable. My eyes watered and vision blurred. I squeezed them shut involuntarily. When I opened them again, I was met with a silence so deep it felt like a void. The room was steeped in shadows, darker than the previous versions I had blinked into existence. The figure stood almost beside my bed now, close enough that I could make out the vaguest contours of its face. It was disturbingly similar to mine, but twisted, distorted, a caricature forged from nightmares. The sense of menace was palpable. It didn't move, just hovered near, its presence a cold reminder of my entrapment. The room's air grew dense, making each breath a labor. I could hear my own heartbeats echoing, as if the room itself pulsed with a living dread. I squeezed my eyes shut and began counting to 100. Silly, perhaps, but it was the only coping mechanism I could think of. My internal voice trembled as I mentally raced through the numbers, desperate for some semblance of normalcy. When I reached 100, with trembling hands, I lowered the blanket and opened my eyes. To my overwhelming relief, the room had returned to its familiar state. The comforting hum of the city outside, the soft glow of streetlights filtering through my curtains, and most importantly, the absence of the menacing figure. The rest of the night was spent in fearful wakefulness. I couldn't risk closing my eyes, not even to blink. The memory of the shifting realities and the looming figure was too fresh, too raw. I kept the lights on and waited for dawn, every sound, every shadow amplifying my anxiety. It had been a day like any other. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purples and oranges. As dusk settled, the room seemed to embrace an unusual cold. Trying to shake off the chill, I wrapped myself in my comforter and waited for sleep's warm embrace. That night, my dreams were vivid, a tapestry of surreal landscapes, distant memories, and fragmented events. But amidst this dreamscape, something changed. The surroundings dimmed, the sounds muffled, and a cold draft swept through, signaling a shift from dream to a nightmarish reality. Suddenly, I found myself half awake, aware of the room around me yet trapped in my body. The paralysis was stifling. My eyes darted around, catching glimpses of familiar objects. The old oak dresser, the patterned curtains, and the moonlight casting silvery shadows on the walls. The initial panic was soon overshadowed by another sensation, an intimate touch. Delicate fingers, not of my own, seemed to explore my forearm, their cold imprint tracing patterns on my skin. The sensation was unsettling. These phantom limbs, invisible yet undeniably present, began wrapping around me in an embrace that felt both foreign and oddly familiar. Their grip was a paradox, gentle in its touch, but relentless in its hold. In the oppressive silence, another sound began to emerge, an irregular, shallow breathing. It was close, too close, as if someone was lying right beside me. My heartbeat quickened, every pulse echoing the dread that consumed me. My restricted gaze caught a hint of a shadowy figure, barely discernible yet unmistakably there. Its form was fluid, merging with the room's darkness but standing out in its ominous presence. This silhouette seemed to be the origin of the phantom limbs, anchoring them to this realm. With the figure's proximity, the room's atmosphere grew heavier. The air felt thick, almost tangible, as if I could reach out and touch the very essence of the dread that enveloped the room. Time distorted. Each second stretched out, amplifying the sensation of the unseen touch and the unnerving sound of the breathing that seemed to resonate in the room. I tried to rationalize, to find an explanation amidst the chaos of my thoughts. Was it a manifestation of some buried memories, a psychological response to some forgotten trauma, or was it truly something more, a brush with the inexplicable? The room itself seemed to respond to the figure's presence. The aged wooden floorboards creaked softly, as if whispering tales of forgotten times. The wind outside rustled the autumn leaves, adding to the symphony of unease. The weight of the presence, the phantom limbs, and the breaths beside me culminated in a crescendo of fear. And then, as abruptly as it began, the ordeal started to recede. The shadowy figure slowly blended back into the room's obscurity, the phantom limbs unwinding and dissolving into nothingness. The weight lifted, freeing me from the invisible chains. Gasping for breath, I bolted upright, my fingers clutching the sheets, drenched in sweat. The room, bathed in the soft glow of dawn, returned to its familiar state, with no traces of the night's eerie visitor. Only the chilling memory and the haunting sensation of the phantom touch remained as testaments to the ordeal. I spent the morning reflecting, trying to piece together the events, grappling with the boundary between reality and illusion. The house became a focal point of my thoughts. Had others experienced such an event in this room? Was the figure a vestige of a past resident, or was it a manifestation of my psyche? Although the events of that night never repeated themselves, the memory remains etched deep within. Sleep, for me, became a realm of infinite possibilities, where the line between the familiar and the unknown could blur, even if just for a fleeting moment. The sanctuary I once found in the night's embrace was now tinged with a hint of trepidation, reminding me of the mysteries that might lie just beyond the veil of our understanding. The city was alive with lights and sounds as I gazed out of my hotel window. I had arrived earlier that day for a business conference, and after a series of never-ending meetings, the plush hotel bed beckoned me. The room was grand, but it also bore an uncanny silence, perhaps an echo of many transient stories it had housed. The weight of the day bore down on me as I nestled into the bed. The shadows of the room danced softly, synchronized with the swaying of the tree branches outside the window. Before long, I was teetering on the edge of consciousness. But then, the line between sleep and wakefulness blurred. An icy grip held me down, my body paralyzed. I could see the ceiling above, the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through my curtains, but I couldn't move a muscle. Panic surged within. This wasn't my first experience with sleep paralysis, but something felt eerily different. With great effort, I managed to shift my gaze towards the room's full-length mirror. To my horror, reflected back wasn't just my paralyzed form on the bed, but also the spectral figure of a girl lying atop me. pale with cascading dark hair. Her ethereal eyes looked mournfully into mine, and a deep sorrow emanated from her. Our synchronized breathing filled the room, its rhythm both hypnotic and terrifying. Time stretched endlessly. I could feel the weight of her presence, but even more horrifying were her cool fingers, attempting to intertwine with mine, seeking some form of connection. Then, in an instant, the paralysis broke. I jolted upright, gasping for air. Compelled, I looked into the mirror once more. Instead of lying atop me, the ghostly girl was now behind me, sitting, reaching out as if to touch my shoulder. Her fingers, just inches from making contact, seemed to beckon me into her world. Terror propelled me into action. I dashed out of the room, leaving behind my belongings, the haunting figure, and the remnants of a sleepless night. Breathing heavily, I made my way to the hotel lobby, and voice trembling, demanded another room. The receptionist, a middle-aged man with wise, weary eyes, looked at me with a mix of concern and understanding. Without asking any questions, he handed me a key to another room, on a different floor. His silence was unnerving, but at that moment, all I wanted was to be away from that room. After relocating, sleep eluded me. The mirror in my new room remained covered with a blanket I found in the closet. Dawn broke, and the city came to life, but the terror of the night continued to haunt me.